Virgo, nobody planned this. That's the thing about it. Um, Nobody sits down one day and decides, you know what, I'm going to let someone younger completely dismantle my defenses and take up permanent residence in my chest. Nobody chooses it like a rational decision. It just happens. Um, Quietly at first, then all at once. And by the time you notice what's occurred, they're already in there, fully, completely, taking up more space than you budgeted for. And now you're here, um, slightly bewildered, possibly slightly embarrassed about how thoroughly this happened, trying to understand what this is and what it means, and whether it's something you should be running toward or quietly walking away from before anyone gets hurt. Let's talk about it. All of it, honestly. First, uh, the bewilderment, because that's probably the dominant experience right now. Not just the feeling, the confusion about the feeling, the specific disorientation of experiencing something you didn't see coming, um, in a direction you maybe didn't expect to be pulled, with an intensity that doesn't match the story you had about what this kind of connection would look like for you. Because most people have a story about who they'll fall for, what age range makes sense, what the appropriate dynamic looks like, mm, what their heart is and isn't supposed to do based on logic, based on what's reasonable, based on what other people would understand without raising an eyebrow. And then the heart, which has never particularly cared about stories or logic or raised eyebrows, does something completely outside the script. Uh, and here you are, um, outside the script with someone younger, specifically, particularly, undeniably younger, having taken over your heart in a way that probably feels slightly ridiculous and completely real simultaneously. Both of those things can be true. Um, Slightly ridiculous and completely real. Um, they're not contradictory. Um, they're just the texture of something that arrived outside of plan. Now let's talk about why. Because understanding what's actually happening, not just that it's happening, um, is what helps you navigate it with some clarity, rather than just riding the wave of it until it either crashes or carries you somewhere you didn't intend to go. What draws people across age gaps in the genuine cases, the ones that aren't about power or novelty or ego, um, is almost never actually about age. Age is the surface descriptor. What's underneath it is something more specific. Um, it might be energy, um, the specific quality of someone who hasn't yet been worn down by the accumulation of disappointments that tends to make people gradually, almost imperceptibly smaller, more careful, less willing to go all in on anything. Um, Someone whose enthusiasm hasn't been edited out of them yet, whose belief in things, in people, in possibility in their own capacity to build something worth having is still intact in a way that makes being around them feel like something your own system needed to remember was possible. That energy, um, when it's genuine, when it's not performed youth, but actual aliveness, is magnetic at any age. Uh, and magnetic doesn't ask permission before it works on you. It might be perspective, uh, someone who sees the world through a lens that's different from yours, not because they're naive, but because they're earlier in the timeline. They haven't been shaped by the same things that shaped you. Their reactions, their references, their way of moving through a situation, um, all of it slightly different from what you're used to. Um, and that difference, rather than creating a gap, might be creating something closer to fascination. Um, the fascination of encountering a mind that works differently from your own, that challenges your assumptions without trying to, that makes you explain things you've always taken for granted, and in the explaining, makes you see them differently than you did before. Um, that kind of fascination, the intellectual, the curiosity based kind, is one of the most sustainable forms of attraction that exists because it doesn't fade when the novelty does. It deepens as you go. Or it might be something simpler and harder to articulate. They just see you in the specific way that has nothing to do with age and everything to do with attention. Um, the way they look at you, the quality of interest they bring, um, the fact that they're not distracted by everything else in the room when you're talking, the way they ask questions that tell you they've been paying attention to more than the surface. Um, being seen, really seen by someone who didn't have to be paying that close attention but chose to anyway. That doesn't have an age requirement. Um, that lands the same way, regardless of how many years separate the two people involved. This reflection invites you to consider, what specifically is it about this person that got through? Not the age, not the general attraction, the specific thing. Um, the quality, the moment, the particular way they showed up that your defenses didn't catch in time. Because naming it, getting precise about what actually happened, is what helps you understand whether this is something worth pursuing or something worth understanding about yourself, regardless of where it goes. Um, Now, let's address the thing that's probably sitting in the back of your mind. The question that might be louder than the feeling itself. Um, should I? That question in this context usually isn't really about the relationship itself. It's about what other people will think, about whether it looks a certain way from the outside, about the raised eyebrows and the unsolicited opinions and the cultural narrative that has very specific things to say about age gaps and who benefits and who's being naive. And some of those concerns are worth taking seriously. Um, Not all of them, but some. So let's separate the ones worth examining from the ones worth releasing. Worth examining, um, are you in equivalent positions of power? Not in terms of age, in terms of dynamic. Is this a connection between two people who are genuinely equal in how much they could affect each other? Or is there a structural imbalance that the age difference amplifies? Financial, professional, social, anything that creates a hierarchy where one person has significantly more leverage than the other. Not because hierarchy automatically makes something wrong, but because imbalance requires more honesty and more care than connection between equals, worth looking at directly, not defensively, directly. Worth examining, uh, are they actually where you think they are? Um, Not in terms of feelings, in terms of life stage. What they want from the next 5 years, where they're going, what they're still figuring out that you've already figured out, and whether the gap in those things would require compromise from one of you that isn't actually sustainable long term. Not a deal breaker necessarily. Um, but a conversation worth having before the heart gets further in than it already is. Worth releasing what people think. Full stop. The raised eyebrows, the unsolicited commentary, the cultural shorthand that flattens every age gap connection into the same simplified narrative regardless of its actual content. Worth releasing the idea that you need to justify this to anyone before you've even decided what it is. Worth releasing the preemptive self judgment, the slightly embarrassed inner voice that says, this isn't what someone like me does. Uh, because someone like you, as it turns out, um, does exactly what you're doing right now, feels what you're feeling, gets taken over by something that didn't fit the plan, because you're a person. And people across every age, every life stage, every carefully constructed idea of who they are and who they're supposed to want get their hearts taken over by the wrong timeline. Constantly, consistently, without asking permission first. You're not an exception to that. You're just the current example of it. This reflection invites you to consider, what specifically are you judging yourself for? Not what you think you should be judging yourself for, what you actually are. The specific self criticism that's running underneath all of this. Because that criticism, whatever form it's taking, is probably not really about the age difference. Um, it's about something older, something that was already there. The age gap just gave it something new to attach to. And knowing what it's actually about separating the real concern from the borrowed shame um, is worth doing for your own clarity, regardless of where this goes. Now, let's talk about what completely takes over actually means. Because that phrase, takes over your heart, um, is significant, not takes up space, not features prominently, takes over, which implies that something that was previously running your emotional landscape, some previous preoccupation, some previous connection, some previous version of what you thought you wanted, um, has been displaced, replaced. Not gradually, completely. That's a significant shift. And it's worth asking what it displaced. Um, Not to mourn it, but to understand what this person arrived into, what landscape their presence changed, what they filled or what they cleared that needed filling or clearing. Um, because connections that take over don't usually arrive in already full spaces. They arrive in spaces that were ready, even when the person occupying that space didn't know they were ready. Something in you was available to this. Something in you was open to being taken over. Um, Even if that openness was unconscious, and that openness, wherever it came from, whatever created it, um, is actually important information about where you are right now, about what you need, about what this season of your life might actually be asking for. That this person, younger and unexpected and outside the plan, um, might be pointing at, even if they don't end up being the answer to it. Because sometimes the person who takes over the heart isn't the destination, they're the signal. Um, the thing that woke up a part of you that had gone quiet, that reminded you what it feels like to be genuinely, involuntarily, can't help it moved by another person. And that reminder, however it arrived, whoever delivered it, um, is worth something, independent of what the connection becomes. And sometimes they are the destination. Sometimes the unexpected arrival, um, the one that didn't fit the plan, didn't match the story, came in the wrong age bracket at the allegedly wrong time, turns out to be exactly right. Um, Not despite the age difference, um, just regardless of it. Because what they bring, what the connection carries, what gets built between two people who choose each other honestly, that doesn't have a birth year requirement. Uh, what it has is a honesty requirement, a clarity requirement, a willingness to look at this without the filter of what it's supposed to look like, um, and see it for what it actually is, which requires getting honest about what you want, what you're actually looking for, whether this connection specifically, practically, in the daily reality of what it would look like, um, aligns with that, not in the best case scenario version. in the actual version, this reflection invites you to consider, if the age difference didn't exist, if that particular variable was removed, would you still be asking whether you should pursue this? Or would the answer already be obvious? Because if removing the age makes the yes clear, then the question was never really about whether to pursue it. It was about whether you're willing to pursue it despite the thing that makes it complicated. And that is a different question with a different kind of answer. Here's what's true. Simply and without decoration, the heart doesn't take over without reason. And not completely, not in the way you're describing. Um, it responds to something real, something in this person that resonates with something in you at a level that bypassed every rational filter you had in place. That's not nothing. Uh, that's actually the opposite of nothing. What you do with it is yours to decide, carefully, honestly, with eyes open to both the beauty and the complexity of what this actually is. Not what you want it to be, not what you're afraid it might be, what it actually is. That clarity arrived at, honestly, is the only thing that produces a decision you won't regret in either direction. The power is yours. It always has been. Follow the real thing, whatever the real thing turns out to be. Not the plan, not the story, not what makes sense on paper. The actual living, already in your chest, real thing. With honesty, with care, with enough courage to find out what it becomes when you stop apologizing for feeling it. Take what resonates, softly release the rest. Trust yourself. Tell me in the comments, what is it about this person specifically that got through every defense you had? I want the real answer, not the surface one. Drop it below. And have you ever let yourself pursue something that didn't fit the plan? How did it go? Tell me. That's it for today. Go be honest with yourself about what you feel, um, before you decide what to do with it. In that order, always in that order. Until next time.